So, last week, we just went through the one chapter. We talked about the laws of the personal vow, what to do, not to do, to vow or not to vow. That's the question. And we learned that there was nothing really improper with a vow, but there were parameters that need to be observed in making a vow. This class is we're going to briefly talk about the war against Midian, or the cities that were in this region, the tribal region of the tribes of the Midianite people. And then we're going to move on after that. We're going to go into, we'll talk briefly about the dividing of spoils, and then we're going to go into the offerings, but I would like to hopefully spend appropriate amount of time talking about the request of Reuven and Gad, and how they requested permission from Moshe not to go into the land, which seems to be a really, it's a tough one for Moshe to have to handle. I mean, he gets very upset about it, and we'll talk about that. War against Midian starts off in the 31st chapter of verse 1. God spoke to Moshe, saying, "Take revenge against the Midianite for the children of Israel. After that, you will be gathered to your people." What did he mean to be gathered to his people when he told Moshe? He was going to die. So after this takes place, you're going to be taken up to your people. Moshe immediately spoke to the people, saying, "From among yourselves get men armed and ready for combat against Midian, to carry out God's revenge against Midian. You should send the army 1,000 from each tribe." 1,000 from each tribe. This applies to all the tribes of Israel. From Israel's first population, 1,000 men were handed over from each tribe, totaling 12,000 armed for combat. Moshe sent them, the 1,000 from each tribe, from the army, and he sent them with Pinchas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the army, with the sacred vessels and the signal trumpet entrusted to him. They besieged Midian, and as God had commanded Moshe. They killed every male. They killed the Midianite king who fell upon their own people's corpses. The 5 kings of Midian that they killed were Evi, Rechem, Tzur, Hur, Reva. They killed Balaam, the son of Behor, with a sword. The children of Israel took the Midianite women captive along with their small children. They plundered all of the animals in the herds and all their possessions. They set fire to their residential cities and their cloisters. They took all the booty and all the plunder of both men and beast, but kept nothing for themselves. They brought the captives and the plunder and the booty to Moshe, Eleazar the priest, and the entire community of Israel to the camp at the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. When they heard that some youth had gone outside the camp to plunder, Moshe, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went out to meet them outside the camp to put an end to it. Moshe became angry with the officers of the army, both the officers over thousands of men and the officers of hundreds of men who had returned from the campaign of war. Moshe said to them, "You've allowed these females to live?" They were the very ones who acted on Balaam's words against the children of Israel to betray God in the Peor affair, resulting in a plague among God's congregation. "Now kill every male child and kill everyone incapable of knowing a man. I mean everyone. You should sleep with who could sleep with a male. But you may keep alive the young girls who have never experienced a man." Seems to be pretty harsh, doesn't it? So what does he mean by all males and females who are capable of doing that? Talking about
the idolatry.
All right, we're talking about males and females who are capable of interacting in sexual relations with the Israelites.
Sexual immorality.
So we're talking about from teenagers up. They were not to remain in the camp. My commentary next is not a promotion of what Israel should do today. However, I do believe that if Israel wants to bring peace to the land, they're going to have to invade and show the same level of mercy to the enemy as the enemy has shown to them. And that is zero. Not talking about the children and the innocent. We're not talking about them. We're talking about Hamas and those who are supporting Hamas. Hamas has been given millions of dollars. Billions. Billions. In 10 years alone, not counting all the other times. Billions of dollars. Literally, they could pave their road with silver.
And feed all their people.
And feed all their people and have the best schools. Instead, their Hamas leadership is jet-setting around the world, eating the finest foods, gorging themselves. They're extremely obese. They are abusing their people, and set a poll recently conducted by an American poll organization. 70% of the Palestinians in that area, the Arabs living under Hamas control, say they wish that they were done with and gone. They don't want them. They don't want the rule, but they can't speak out. They're in fear of their life. So by Hashem's will, may Prime Minister Netanyahu be wise and do the right thing. I really do believe that. Now let's before we move on, let's talk about the Midian battle and what it represents. This is a battle right prior to them going into the land. Moshe is about ready to die. When we get into the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to have Moshe's recounting of the whole event. It's like the retelling of the whole story. What does it mean? Why were they to go in, and how can we draw down some ideas from the Hasidic masters on this idea? The 7 nations of the Canaanite people have connections to the necessity of Israel to refine themselves before going into the land. The Midianite people represented the undesirable quality of people that was going to keep them from possessing the land and keep them from achieving going into the land. We said that being in the land of Canaan is representative of spiritual maturity in our life. That the ultimate goal for every one of us is to achieve a higher level of spiritual maturity. But along with spiritual maturity, there should also be personal maturity, right? A person who's personally very immature, who is attempting to achieve higher spirituality, it's not going to happen. Why? Because many of our personal, quirks and little ticks that we have can keep us from rising to higher levels. It is said that Moshe, because of his anger, is not able to see this whole idea of the purging of the vessels that came back. And that is why Elazar had to jump in and add some more descriptions of the law about the purification of all the vessels that came back. Moshe just mentioned one part, and the Hasidus masters say that he couldn't see because of his anger. There's one commentary that talks about how anger blinds a person. That all the Torah that we can learn, that if we have unchecked and uncontrolled anger, it keeps Torah from staying in us and within us. One commentary talks about the person who becomes angry. It's as if their righteous soul leaves their body in a fit of anger. And that's why when it returns, it's lost its Torah. You understand? Mm-hmm. It's losing its effect of Torah. So unchecked anger can keep a person from being able to maintain the integrity of their knowledge and wisdom in Torah. And a person who, it's not just about anger itself, but it's about many other different things. There are seven nations or 7 kings that are represented in the Midian, who lived in Midian. And these 7 kings can represent the 7 areas of our life that needs to be rectified or brought down into submission to Hashem's will. So we can talk about just a couple. You can think of many that you can add in that case as well. Anger being number 1, bringing that under subjection to Hashem. Second is jealousy toward others. That has to be brought into subjection. Ego, that has to be brought under subjection. Because with all of these things, it is impossible for us to begin to mature or enter into a place of spiritual maturity in our life. There are people not only who they might be perfect when it comes to not having anger, but they have pride and ego. And nobody else knows it because they can mask it in some level of sweetness. But deep down inside, they're very, very egotistical. As a matter of fact, all of their relationships are born out of a desire to benefit themselves and not others. Even a person who seems to be very charitable can be very egotistical. Why? Because out of their charity, they're making themselves look good. They like the plaque on the wall. You know, if you've been to some shuls and you see every piece of furniture, every room has somebody's name on the door, right? A true tzaddik, a true righteous person, doesn't care if their name's on the door. And generally, we all understand that many people who want their name on the door probably rarely even went to the shul. They just want their names on the doors so people can go, oh, what a great righteous person. They bought 2 chairs in the shul. But at the same time,
I don't see names on any of our chairs.
no, you don't see names on any of the chairs here because the community participates in this, right?
Just joking.
No, it's true. It's true. However, if you want to put your name on the chair, fine. I think a name on a chair starts at like 250,000.
Forget it, I can't do that.
Yeah.
You and I work together on this.
So if you can imagine the listen, we all need a little bit of pride. We all need a little bit of ego, because if you didn't have some little bit of those things, you would
Not
allow
have an
people to
identity.
walk all over you, right?
Wouldn't have an identity.
You wouldn't have an identity. You have to have a little bit of self-confidence. I'm not talking about somebody who's walking around being humiliated and beat up all the time. We're talking about a condition in which it becomes spiritually pathological, unbalanced. Notice that Hashem doesn't ask Moshe to attack every tribe and every nation that it's in the area. Why? Because these other kings and these little other communities and nations, little small nation states, didn't in themselves in any way buffet or come against Israel. They had no conflict with Israel.
Midian
So-
went out of their way.
Midian went out of their way, right? They went out of their way to do whatever they can to pester them and to give them difficulties.
Yeah.
So the point is this: how would one determine what needs to be dealt with before they reach, or what's hindering them from spiritual maturity? Look and examine at your own life, and to be honest with you, only you can do that. However, if one appeals to Hashem with sincere prayer, I mean really appeals to Hashem and say, open my eyes to my own inadequacies, open my eyes to the things that keep me from receiving Torah, and expose them. Bring them in the open. And you know how he brings them in the open? He doesn't send the cherubim down to your house, I can tell you that. What he does is he brings an acquaintance or a friend or somebody at work who will begin to point out every one of your little flaws, and it'll annoy you, and it'll get on your nerves, but just, bless Hashem. Bless Hashem and say, you're so kind. You let me know about all these things so that I can reach to the next level. So the next time, especially after leaving this class, every one of you, I truly believe, really do want to ascend to higher levels. You want to draw down a lot of Torah. And we don't want anything to keep us from gaining more knowledge. So when you leave here, just know you're probably going to be challenged. Somebody's going to say something on the phone to you. You're going to talk to a help desk of your computer, and somebody's going to say something to you, and it's going to get on your nerves. And there's nothing wrong with saying, Baruch Hashem, thank you. This person is pointing something out that is keeping me from absorbing more Torah. We never can be too filled with Torah, can we?
No.
We never learn too much, and we're all needing to learn as much as we possibly can. So, what do we learn about the word of Midian is that in the engagement, there is great reward. They bring back tons of sheep and cattle, weapons, and just all kinds of amazing things. They are able to get rid of this pestilence of tribal members that have attempted to bring them into sin and idolatry. And now they have all this wealth. I want you to understand that bringing yourself to higher emotional, psychological maturity has great reward, not just in the world to come and not just in Torah. When you begin to mature personally and you learn how to be measured and metered and how you approach people, you will begin to receive the great reward of physical benefits in this world. People like being around you. None of us like being around somebody who's obnoxious, do we? Well, I know some of you might enjoy obnoxious people. Birds of a feather flock together, right? We don't like being around obnoxious people, but at the same time, a sweet person, a person with genuineness and kindness, you're attracted to them. And people that have matured emotionally are also blessed in their life. They financially become blessed. Their relationships are much more beautiful. But we have to remember that it's possible during this time of refinement in which you go to battle with yourself. You're going to endure some battles and have some rewards, and some of those rewards will need to be sanctified by God. Does that make sense? Some of these great rewards will need to be sanctified. Not all blessings, put it this way, not all blessings can lead to positive things. Right? There are some people that we've seen won the lottery. I don't know if you've seen that thing on television, how the lottery ruined my life. Right? I don't think it would ruin my life, but I'd like to test it and see. Right? But the whole point is I guess when you're not very materialistic, you don't care one way or another. But the lottery ruined their life. Why? They thought what ailed them, money could solve. And in reality, what ailed them is they needed to mature emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Money wasn't the problem. A person who thinks materialism is the answer to their problem is a person who's immature. Lacks spiritual wisdom and knowledge. I mean, there are some people that have great intelligence. Have you ever known someone that was real smart and didn't seem to have a tinge of common sense? Right? There is this idea, I think tomorrow we might even discuss some of that in the Path of the Just. There are people that can have plenty of technological knowledge but lack just good common sense. And it's easy to point, those people, right? It's the person that you're having a discussion with and you explain a certain situation to them, and because you happen to know the ins and outs of whatever you're discussing. And then they'll offer a suggestion and you're thinking, were they even listening to this conversation? I mean, do they not realize that that's not even possible to do, right? And so this happens, but what a wonderful place where you can take and retrieve the possessions and the things in the material world and sanctify them by Hashem. See, that is really our job in this world, is to take the physical things that even belong to the world of ego and pride and gossip and all those things, and take and gather those things together and sanctify them before Hashem. You mikvah them, you cleanse them. And so that is the understanding from this idea. Real quick, I'd like to go through and talk about the purification of vessels so that we can understand. The purification of vessels, there were two types of processes. One, if a vessel was made of metallic vessel, how was it purified? Do you remember?
Fire.
Through fire, right? Why was clay not purified through fire?
Because it's already prepared.
It'll fall apart, right?
Right.
But a clay pot doesn't cost a whole lot of money. And if they knew non-kosher meat was put in it, you just destroy it. You'd throw it away. If you weren't, if it didn't have non-kosher meat in it, you would just cleanse it and rinse it in a mikveh. However, there needed to be the ashes of the red heifer to be put into this. Why? Because many of those vessels touched death. They were around death and dying, and the soldiers were around death. Notice that when the soldiers came, they stayed on the outside of the camp. Why?
Yeah, because
They needed to be purified.
Right.
And none of them could, the 12,000 soldiers or 13,000 soldiers couldn't even do any offerings until they had been purified. Now we're going to see that the spoils of war are divided. During this time, a standing army wasn't paid by a paycheck in their automatic deposit. They were paid through spoils of war.
Right.
And Moshe became a bit upset because some of the young people heard that all of this booty was out there, and so they took off and was going to go get them some. And it they ended up bringing the calculated plunder, all the animals, etc., together with the priests. Let's go to verse 25. God spoke to Moshe saying, calculate the total number of the captured people and animals. You should do this together with Eleazar, the priest, and the community's paternal tribal leaders. Divide the plunder equally between soldiers that went out to battle and the rest of the entire congregation. You should take a tax for God from the soldiers who went out to battle from the people, from the cattle, donkey, and sheep. Take one individual from every 500. Take this from their half of the plunder and give it to Eleazar the priest as a gift to God. From the half belongings to the children of Israel, take 1/5 of the people, cattle, donkeys, and sheep, and all the animals, and give them to the Levites, the guardians of God's tabernacle. Moshe and Eleazar, the priest, did what God had commanded Moshe. The total plunder, in addition to the spoils that the army had taken as spoils, were 675,000 sheep. Think of that's a lot of sheep, right? 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and people. The number of women who had not experienced sleeping with a man was 32,000. Thus, there were the taxes from the half that was apportioned to those who went out to battle. The number of sheep were 337,500. Thus, the tax to God from the sheep was 675. 36,000 cattle, of which the tax to God was 72. 30,500 donkeys, of which the tax to God was 61. 16,000 people, of which the tax to God was 32 people. Moshe gave the tax, which was a gift to God, and Eleazar the priest, as God had commanded Moshe. So we see this whole bringing of offerings. Next, in chapter 31, verse 48, the officers of the military, they brought a gift to God. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. Why did they even allow the young girls to be even left alive?
Because they were innocent. They had not been soiled by sexual relationship. They were little girls.
I understand, but
They were virgins.
They killed all of the men and the boys.
Right. Because the boys were capable of the violence when they grow older to be men, and there was also a high level of sexual deviancy deviancy in the boys. Now, young boys could, let's see, was all the boys killed or the young boys allowed to live? I think the young boys were allowed to live, because it said
What I read, it looked like
Every male.
every male was.
every male,
Verse 17, every male.
every male,
Yes.
right. So it's hard to,
So that's why it made me wonder why he even left the young girls even alive, because they can grow up to have the same hatred.
well, yeah, but by the time
as
they
well.
grow up, most of them are growing up in Israeli homes, is in Jewish homes. Most of them, at some point, will marry other slaves.
And most societies, the women were always lower anyway.
Right, they didn't.
You know what I mean? They,
Right.
in any culture,
Right.
they did not have an elevation. So I think
So-
that they could be submissive to.
It's a good question, though. Betty, did you have
Plus, they're
something?
beautiful. Those women were supposed to be beautiful.
I was just questioning, I guess I had never, this is something I had never read before.
What verse are you in?
Yeah.
I'm in verse 39, when it talks about, verse 40, 16,000 human souls, and out of these the tribute to God was 32.
Mm-hmm.
So were these,
These 32 people were given to the Levites to use as workers and laborers in their homes, basically. Yeah. So they were allowed to take slaves, but we all know what the law is when it comes to Jubilee, right?
Yeah.
That was rectified, so it wasn't like a permanent status. Okay, yes, sir.
The Levites took wives also?
Levites took wives, yes. They had to be married to
Yeah, you have
be
to.
Hakohen Gadols and priest, yeah. So when you got old enough to get married, you got married, so.
Because they had to have other Levites.
Correct.
You're supposed to procreate. That's
You have to
the
have
whole
baby
idea.
Levites.
Yeah. You
Right.
gotta. It's the whole idea.
Okay, let's go to chapter 32.
Baby Levites.
baby levies?
Baby levies, yeah. BB levies. Val, would you give us the honor and read, start with chapter 2, and I'll stop you whenever it's time.
The children of Reuben and the children of Gad had abundant livestock, very great. They saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. The children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and said to Moses, to Eleazar the Cohen, and to the leaders of the assembly, saying, Adaroth and Dibon and Jazer and Nimrah and Heshbon and Elealah and Sebam and Nebo and Baon, the land that Hashem smote before the assembly of Israel. It is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. They said, If we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a heritage. Do not bring us across the Jordan. Moses said to the children of Gad and the children of Reuben, Shall your brothers go out to battle while you settle here? Why do you dissuade the heart of the children of Israel from crossing to the land that Hashem has given them? This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. They went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, and they dissuaded the heart of the children of Israel not to come to the land that Hashem has given them. The wrath of Hashem burned on that day, and he swore, saying, If these men who came up from Egypt, from the age of 20 years and above, will see the ground that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they have not followed me fully, except for Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they followed Hashem fully. The wrath of Hashem burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until the end of the entire generation that did evil in the eyes of Hashem. Behold, you have risen up in place of your fathers, a society of sinful people, to add more to the burning wrath of Hashem against Israel. For if you will turn away from after him, he will again let it rest in the wilderness, and you will destroy this entire people. They approached him and said, Pens for the flock shall we build here for our livestock, and cities for our small children. We shall arm ourselves swiftly in the vanguard of the children of Israel, until we will have brought them to their place. And our small children will dwell in the fortified cities before the inhabitants of the land. We shall not return to our homes until the children of Israel will have inherited, every man his inheritance, for we shall not inherit with them across the Jordan and beyond. For our inheritance has come to us on the east bank of the Jordan.
Okay. Then Moshe said to him, If you do this thing that you said, if you arm yourselves for battle before Hashem and your army crosses the Jordan before God until he has driven out the enemies before him, and the land will be conquered before Hashem, then afterwards you may return. You will be free of any obligation to God and Israel, and this land will become your heritage before God.
So it's kind of like a vow they had to make.
Right. Now, there's a couple of things, the reason why Moshe was so upset. For Reuben and Gad and those who are with them to decide not to go into the land was tantamount to cheating all of the people of Israel. Cheating every one of them. Why? Because for one to not bring another to full inheritance in the covenant, you're stealing from them. And Moshe was upset. Now you have to understand, Moshe didn't see the big picture yet, and he had to go inquire about what the situation was all about. I mean, you can understand why he was upset. Why was he so upset? Because he saw that if Reuben and Gad did not cross over, how many people in Israel would decide not to go with them? And once again, 40 years would need to be repeated. I mean, this is terrible. So Rabbi Nachman says this. Tani'un, dissuade. This whole idea is, why are you trying to dissuade the Israelites from crossing over the land that God is giving them? Ta'inum, dissuade, has the same root as to know, to cheat. Cheating comes about because of the klippah of nogah and combination of good and evil that has the power to fool a person. The east bank of the Jordan represents nogah, which is to dissuade, it appease or appeals to you. When the tribes of Reuben and Gad are asked for their portion in the east bank of the Jordan, Moshe was afraid they had fallen victim to nogah. Was afraid that they had been allured by the land, thinking they've lost sight of the big picture. They've lost sight of the covenant that was given to their father Abraham. This is what he's thinking. He's thinking they got caught up in the whole beauty of the land and it was perfect for them, and they forgot that they were supposed to take the land that God had given them. He said, and would not only harm themselves but also cheat the Jews out of the opportunity to enter the Holy Land. But when the tribes of Reuben and Gad replied that they were willing to sacrifice for holiness and led the army into battle to conquer the Holy Land, their commitment demonstrated that they would be able to overcome the illusions of nogah and remain steadfast in holiness. Let's talk for a moment about this idea of nogah. We're going to first examine this idea that Reuben and Gad had motives for not entering into the land. Was it their lack of love for their people? No. Was it their lack of love for their brothers? No. Was it the lack of love for the land? No. What was it for? Because they had so many sheep and the land was fertile. This was just an ideal place to raise the animals. In the modern day and throughout Jewish history, there have been those who have chosen to live outside of the land for various reasons. Some for nefarious reasons, meaning not good, positive reasons, because they wanted to engage in all types of sinful behavior without the responsibility of living in the land. And then there are others who have chosen and today continue to choose to live outside of the land of Israel in the United States. One of the greatest Jewish populations in the world is where? Not in Israel, but here.
Correct.
Is that a sin? Now there are some who would say it would be a sin, but we understand what is a sin only can be determined by the individual level, what motivates the individual to stay here. But there are many people that are here because this is a positive place for them to be. They are still fighting for their brethren. They still love the Torah. They still love the land. They look forward to the day of being in the land, but this is a place where they need to settle because this is where they get their parnassah, their financial gain and their money. But they are not allured by the nogal, they're not dissuaded by the materialistic world. Does that make sense? So it's possible to say I'm not ready to move, to make my move, to do what I'm supposed to do, because this is just the right thing at this moment. But it's not because I'm consumed with my materialism or I'm consumed with my own position and my status that I really do at one point. I will enter the land and I will support my brothers to possess the land, but I'm not going to let the world that I am in here dissuade me or persuade me to be consumed. So the idea is this. There are a lot of people who are, and I spoke to a dear, he's become he's just a beautiful person. Baruch Cantor. Lives in New Zealand, far away from community, and the Jewish community is very small. There's one Orthodox shul, one Reform shul, and he's not even within walking distance of either one of those. And yet this is a man that is truly full of passion and love for his people. He is a citizen, an Israeli citizen, but this is where he's at. And when we look at other people where they're at, and we also examine ourselves, we should not criticize where we're at, but we should ask ourselves this question: why am I here? If I'm here because I've been dissuaded, persuaded to be here, the allurement of material things and my own desire is the reason why I'm here, we should question that. But at the same time, if we're saying, no, deeply, I'm here because I have to be, but my heart is not here. My heart is to be at the foot of Sinai. My heart is to be in Jerusalem. My heart is not to be here. I don't have a choice to be here. I have to work here. I have to make a living. I don't have the financial means to do it. This is where I am able to feed my children and my cattle and my spouses. My spouse. In their cases, spouses. I was talking about them, but when I thought about spices, I'm like, yeah, I better clarify that. I think we're...
Good recovery.
Yeah, good, quick recovery.
Kind of fumbling around it.
Yeah, because you notice as soon as I said that, I just went to blithering mode. Okay.
Everything was plural.
Yeah, exactly. Spouses, babies, daddies, the whole nine yards. Anyway, Rev Nachman says, when Moshe thought that the tribes of Reuben and Gad were trying to dissuade the Jews from taking their rightful inheritance in the Holy Land, he called them a band of sinful men. Targum Onkelos, which is also found in this commentary here, translate the phrase as students of guilty men. In other words, Moses thought of them of having learned from a wicked teacher, a man who withheld laws from them, which is comparable to stealing their inheritance. Now he thought they wished to do the same and deprive other Jews of their inheritance as well. This idea of Moshe sort of jumped the gun, but at the same time, he made an assumption. But you have to understand, he has assumption based on a track record of his people. And he's thinking, have these guys been taught that about laws that doesn't exist, that it's all right to not go into the land and possess your inheritance? But all of that was rectified and taken care of.
Right.
Yes.
Excuse me, right. Moshe couldn't have helped but have thought back on what happened with the spies.
Of course.
And surely this was in his mind, and he
Of
thought,
course.
oh no,
Of
we're
course.
not going to have replay of this.
Right. Now, listen, he wasn't a man of rash anger, okay? This guy was, Moshe is the most humble man, and it was Can you imagine how disturbing knowing that after you come into this battle with Midian, that it was going to be days before you're going to be taken up and joined with your family? I mean, the thought would be is what's going to happen to these people after I'm gone?
That was his concern.
That was his concern.
Sure.
If I'm gone, who's going to hold them to task? Obviously, we know that later on we're going to read about, the leadership that is then put in place that will bring them to glorious victory in the land.